So in the end, how'd I do? On the job, if you don't count insulting people or my meltdown in Florida, by and large, I did okay. And I'm proud of that. Where I couldn't make it was the marketplace. Now, officially, I was never poor. The poverty line, the one 32 million Americans live below, is presently $15,000 a year for a mom and 2 kids. To draw that line, the government takes a basic food budget, the minimum needed to ward off starvation, and multiplies it by 3. But food is cheap in America. I had no trouble eating on a third of my earnings. The problem came when I had to choose between eating and keeping a roof over my head. Now, there's a question I'm always asked. What's wrong with these people? Why do they take it? Why not organize a union? Why not pester their government? Why don't they write a book? Short answer, they'd get fired. Longer answer, they cleaned 19 rooms today, or they dished up 200 dinners. They had to lie to get their jobs, and they have to bend their neck and zip their lips to keep it. Their knees hurt, their backs hurt, they can't pay their bills. A few weeks of their life whittled away at me. It made me smaller. Try 5, 10, 30, 40 years. I wasn't born in the middle class, but my father got me here. I think if you're born in this class, it's natural for you to ignore that lucky accident and attribute all your happiness and your achievements to your own superior talents. You don't realize it took some recent or long-lost ancestors' amazing gifts or grit or capacity to lift your family beyond the reach of desperation. We're supposed to make it on our own in America. So it's also natural for us all to forget how it is we eat fast, live in shiny, clean houses, and buy everything we want cheap. Thanks to other people who drew lower numbers in the birth lottery, these people make us a gift of their life. Let's acknowledge that they're the real major donors. Let's figure out what we owe them.
Thank you, Christina Frank, who is the star of the production currently being presented at the U of I E.C. Mabee Theater. She plays Barbara Ehrenreich, the author of the book Nickel and Dimed, and which was adapted into a play. Thank you so much, Christina.
You're welcome.
And before I introduce the rest of my guests, did you identify with the author Barbara Ehrenreich here?
I definitely identified with her struggle because I myself am a middle-class person, but have had to work a low-wage job several times in my life to support myself, trying to be an actor, support myself trying to be a student. I've waitressed 3 separate times, so I know what it's like, her journey trying to be a waitress in this show also. And also knowing what it's like to try to come to the rescue of people who don't necessarily want to be helped or saved or don't know that they're in jeopardy. And she tries to do this in the show and is ended up being really hurt by the experience. And I know what that's like as well. So I identified with her on many, many levels. It was.
But of course, being a college student, you can look forward to the day of escaping this world of low-paid toil, correct?
Well, let's hope so. I don't know. I've known quite a few actors who've ended up being waiters for the rest of their life.
Okay.
But yes, the idea is that I eventually will not have to do that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Christina, for joining us. This was a first on Live and Local to have a bit of a performance. Thank you for being here, Christina.
Thank you very much.
Good luck in the show.
Thank you.
All right. Now I'd like to introduce the rest of our panel, if I may. To my right, Colin Gordon, Iowa Policy Project, and also a history professor at the U of I. Roberta Till-Retz, also at the Iowa Policy Project, and a program consultant at the University of Iowa Labor Center. Eric Forsythe, the director of Nickel and Dimed and a professor of direction at the University of Iowa. And Gloria Williams, an Iowa City temp worker who's had many, many jobs in her world of work. All right, first of all, I'd like to begin with you, Eric, if I may.
Sure.
Where in the play did this take place?
This actually is at the end of the play, after all of her experiences. It's her true story, Barbara Ehrenreich's true story. She sets out with the idea of taking on minimum wage work as best she can, making it as honest a procedure as she can, leaving money behind, just throwing herself into the marketplace to see if she can make it. She's a middle-aged woman. She's highly educated, highly motivated, and she doesn't know if she can make it.
And a writer.
And a writer. Yes, and quite well known.
Mm-hmm. Eric, this is, I believe, the first, it's been produced in cities around the country, but this is the first time it's been produced on a university stage.
That's
is that
right. It's been produced in a few regional cities, actually. It's been produced in Minneapolis, Seattle, but hasn't gone to New York yet. And I think the script is still in development.
Mm-hmm.
And we are actually the first university to take it on.
Did you choose it to be produced here at the University of Iowa?
Yeah, I read the book a few years ago when it was, on the bestseller list, and I said, "This is a remarkable work. This is extraordinary. I can feel this experience, and this would make a great play, maybe," said I to myself. And then a couple of weeks later, I found out there had been an adaptation by Joan Holden.
Really?
I said, let's get a hold of this and see if we can do it. And I got 2 different versions of the script, both of them interesting, and we put them together, and that's the show that we're doing.
Great. Now, Gloria, let's turn to you. You are presently a temp worker at the university, and you've had a variety of jobs. Did you identify with Barbara Ehrenreich in the play and also in the book, which I believe you read?
Oh, absolutely. Every job that she portrayed in the play, I also have done. I've been a waitress, I've worked as a housekeeper, I've worked out cleaning people's homes, I've worked as a cashier, and have worked in, not Walmart, but a place very similar to it. So absolutely, I've done all those works. I've also done waitress work, and and trying to make a living is very well represented in the play, because it's painful, really, how to work for not only a low wage, but then not be able to pay your bills, and the humiliation that people have to suffer with, even though they're working hard. My mother worked 2 jobs all her life. And
what sort of job?
Waitressing, then she got into real estate, and as she got older, she wasn't able to keep up the pace, so even in her 70s was working in a drugstore as a cashier. In fact, she worked until she couldn't breathe anymore, and they had to take her to the hospital from her place of employment, and now she's on oxygen full-time, but is living on Social Security, basically. She doesn't have savings. She always paid her taxes and always did everything everyone was supposed to do, working 2 jobs. But I'm just glad that we do have a good Social Security program now, and I certainly hate to see it going away.
Well, Gloria, what would you say to people, who would say, now come on, if you worked really hard, and applied yourself and maybe moved to a different part of the country or got some more education or retraining, or hadn't made some life choices along the way, you would be comfortably middle class by this time?
Well, I've actually done all those things. I have moved to different places, different parts of the country, different parts of the world. I've been a waitress in London and in New Mexico. And I actually have 2 college degrees. I have a bachelor's in sociology and one in broadcasting and film. There are a lot of people who have college degrees who don't get much above minimum wage. So it's not really just a matter of education. It's not really a matter of where you're living. The fact is, our system is set up to assume that there are a certain amount of people who will be working these low-wage jobs. It's not really that much of a personal choice. I've been applying for full-time jobs ever since full-time, better jobs for a long time here in Iowa City, and there aren't that many openings.
Okay, I'd like to ask Roberta or Colin, is it the system, or is this just people have flaws of character or something? No, I mean, there's lots of people who think that.
Well, today I was looking at what some very conservative think tanks have to say about this, because one of the things that's so impressive and heartrending about the people in the story or in the book is they work so hard. And we know, I think Gloria said that her mother held 2 jobs all of her life. I think 6% of U.S. workers hold 2 jobs, some of them their whole lives. It's terribly difficult. But this one right-wing think tank called the Center for the American Experiment, to get the other side going here, they said that data generated by the Census Bureau, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Federal Reserve, and other groups really debunk some of the ideas that the system is at fault here. In fact, they say that differences in family income largely reflect differences in how many members of a family actually work and how hard they work. As implying that if you don't have everybody working, well, no wonder you're poor, and if you don't work hard enough, you're poor. And I think that point of view is so thoroughly debunked by this book. I mean, this book, I think, though I didn't feel shame when I read it. She said at the end, how are we supposed to feel? We should feel ashamed. I felt very depressed and very scared for our country after having read this.
So you would say that there is some set of circumstances in this country that is keeping large numbers of people in low-wage jobs.
Yeah, it's our capitalistic system, I think, is not developed the way it should have developed, and I think we have a lot of evidence to indicate what's happened here. It's not at all the fault of individual workers who blame themselves, who feel isolated, who feel powerless, and that's what we see in this book and in the play.
Mm-hmm.
But we see the resilience of their spirit too, which is so impressive about that.
Colin?
Well, I mean, I think what's remarkable with this, I mean, you can't attribute it to the market because lots of other countries have markets. They don't have these problems. I think
For example?
the pervasive poverty, the inability of a family with two hard-earning wage earners to get by and support themselves.
And what countries are better?
All of them.
China?
No, I'm talking about democratic capitalist countries.
Western Europe?
With a market system and a democratic system of government.
Okay.
So Canada, Western Europe, Sweden, take your choice. I think what is something somehow missed in the book a little bit is how this is a sort of profound failure of public policy. The fact that we have what is described as a safety net, things like a minimum wage, but you work full-time, 2,000 hours a year at the minimum wage in this country, and you earn barely half the poverty level. In fact, it takes two full-time workers, more than full-time, with family members to rise above the poverty level. That didn't used to be true in this country. The value of the minimum wage has fallen precipitously, despite the little hike during the Clinton years, over the last 20 years. In 1968, if you made minimum wage, you could raise yourself and two kids above the poverty level.
Are there any statistics on how many people today are working minimum wage and trying to raise a family as opposed to 1968?
The numbers, their numbers are much higher. If you look at the growth in wage groups, what economists call percentiles, the income made by the top half or 3/5 of Americans has gone steadily up over the post-war period. For most of the post-war period into the early 1970s, lower wage workers went right along with them, and then they dropped off. Right at the point when the economy really changed under our feet and became an economy that was generating low-wage, non-unionized service work, rather than the sort of standard post-war model of sort of secure, long-term employment in big firm manufacturing, General Motors, that sort of thing.
Go ahead, Roberta.
Well, one of the striking things about this book is how housing is a huge problem for these low-wage workers. And I read today that something like 1/5 of homeless people work today. They have jobs. They're not people who are not working. And she points out how close she came to being without housing. I think I read that in Iowa City right now, the vacancy rate is like 1.5% to 2%. And a 5% vacancy rate is what's considered sort of a livable amount. But when you have so few places available, and they're not places available for people who are very low wage, I mean, that is a crisis that is affecting us right here.
Gloria?
Yeah, I'm really glad you pointed that out. I make $440 a month is every 2 weeks when I get my paycheck. My rent is $410, and that's low for Iowa City. And the only reason that I'm able to live in a good place with that relatively low rent is that I live in a co-op house.
What is that?
And
for
I have
people
been
that don't know what
looking
that
and
is?
looking. It's a co-op house is a house that is actually owned by a nonprofit, and we share meals and cost for utilities and things like that. So it's the least expensive way that I can afford to live in Iowa City. And I have been looking. I've looked constantly for a more affordable place, or for a place that wouldn't have to be in the co-op house. I love the co-op house. I love my fellow co-opers, but it is really limited how many choices we have, when you make so little money, it's very hard to make a decent living, to be able to pay the rent. And the constant tension, oh my goodness. And one of the worst things for me is the lack of health care. We have got to get a universal health care system in this country, because so more and more people are becoming temporary workers, the way that corporations are more and more now hiring people on a temporary basis and not giving them benefits. And I have to say the university is guilty of that as well. Yeah, I've been a
Colin?
temporary worker for the university for years and have not had any health care in all the jobs I've had with them.
And this brings up, I mean, two important points in terms of this sort of failure of public policy that I was talking about. We gauge much of our response to this problem by this thing we call the poverty level. And yet the poverty threshold, which was first established in the 1950s, is a very sloppy measure built of a market basket of goods and a sort of an average housing cost and a few other things thrown in. It doesn't include the cost of buying your own health care, which is a necessity for most workers today who either are not offered health care at work or can't afford it. It doesn't include the cost of childcare. And so to take the conservative argument that every able member of a household should be working and then not to calculate the cost of childcare into poverty strikes me as a real failure. And then the final point on healthcare is, I think, perhaps the most important one. The reason why American workers are so uniquely insecure in low-wage jobs is because they alone, among their sort of international peers, have to pay the costs of healthcare for themselves and their family in a system that assumes that their employers are going to be picking up that cost, but in which that is no longer the case.
Roberta?
Right, last year, I think the Organization for European Cooperation and Development published a list of the most unequal nations in the world. The United States was the most unequal nation of all the industrialized Western countries. That I think Colin's point is so well taken, that we have a unique public policy failures here. And I did want to mention one public policy failure, which is especially egregious. If you look at the 21 million service sector workers in this country who are not unionized. Now, Barbara Ehrenreich doesn't have much to say at all about unions in this book. And yet what we're seeing here is unionization taking hold among service sector workers. I think the psychological portrait she makes of these workers, it's sort of bifurcated, really. She talks about their resilience, their helpfulness to each other, but she also portrays them as isolated from each other, as subject to such indignities that their self-respect is taken away, that they don't even fight to defend themselves. She at one point compares them to animals who are caged together, that they lose their ability to fight for their own survival. But I think that what we see in reality, in fact, is that Service Employees International Union, the SEIU, and the Teamsters Union, who are ironically now trying to organize professional and scientific staff at the University of Iowa, that certainly, in some people's view, my own included, need a union. They're both having a great deal of success organizing right here in Iowa, as well as across the country, these service sector workers. The janitors in New Jersey got their wages doubled when SEIU organized them under their current president, Andy Stern. So we're seeing casino workers in Las Vegas, hotel workers, kitchen workers, real changes made in their lives through unionization. And this is something they do themselves. It's kind of the free market approach. But when I talk about public policy failure, it's that our labor laws, compared to those in Canada, compared to all those European countries that are richer than ours in terms of dividing the social welfare, they all make unionization much, much easier for workers.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about somebody who would say, well, that's why, manufacturing jobs are leaving the country, because the unions have, priced the workers out of being competitive internationally?
Well, I mean, globalization is not just a thing that happens to everybody. It's a political choice. And you can have globalization on whatever terms you want. And they could include what economists call a social tariff, that is not trading with countries who are going to undermine our manufacturing economy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think one of the fundamental fallacies here is that this is just the market at work, and we should just sort of let it go. There'll be painful readjustments, and we'll all come out better in the end.
Sort of social Darwinism.
Right. And one of the reasons why that's such a fallacy is that Walmart is not a triumph of the market. Walmart is one of the biggest recipients of corporate welfare in the country. Estimates by Good Jobs First are that Walmart received over $1 billion in public aid, tax breaks for building new distribution centers, and that sort of thing in the last 5 years. There's a new, relatively new Walmart distribution center in Altoona, Iowa, that got $10 million of our money to build an institution, these local stores and distribution centers, that by all estimates add nothing to the local economy except slightly lower retail prices.
This is state of Iowa grant money, or is this Altoona, Iowa money?
It's usually
or?
local money, often with the aid of the state, but things like tax increment financing, property tax breaks, or we'll pave your parking lot for you, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, Roberta, I want to ask you about this Western Europe, or did you have another point?
No, I was just going to go back to Walmart, actually. That I think the Walmart example is a good one of the public policy failures on unionization in this country. Walmart has widely been regarded as very difficult to unionize because they take such a strong position in trying to persuade workers that a union would not help them. And as you can tell from reading the book or seeing the play, the pressures on people not to form a union are extremely great. But there's a Walmart that is just organized in Canada. Canada, it's very easy to have a union, as Colin can tell us with his card check recognition, the system that they have in Canada. It's very difficult to get a union here. Very complicated.
Why is it difficult?
Why is it difficult? Because labor laws, I'm glad, I should have mentioned that. Labor laws, our labor laws are among the most rigorous in the country in terms of in the world, thank you, in terms of trying to get a union. And I remember when South Africans were trying to write their own constitution and their own labor laws when Nelson Mandela came in. And I was visiting with someone, and I said, they went all around the world looking at different labor laws, and I said, did you look at our labor law? And they laughed. They said, you have the worst one in the world. We would never want American labor law in our country if we want to have decent standard of living for our workers, and workers organizing themselves.
Mm-hmm. Gloria?
And I just want to make a point. You had asked, is it because of the unions that the jobs are being taken out of the country? Well, it doesn't make sense because the jobs have been leaving the country in increasing amounts where unions haven't been getting stronger. More recently, we've seen more unions growing, but the unions have been going downhill and the jobs have been going out of the country. The problem is really international. We need to have strong unions all over the world. And when they make attempts to organize in places like Colombia, I'm sure you've heard that there's a movement on campus here against Coca-Cola because Coca-Cola workers have been assassinated and harassed by trying to organize a union. Unions are definitely going to help us have a much stronger voice in the way that we live our lives. And I would love to be in a union, and it's a complaint that I have that as a temporary worker, it's very difficult to find a union that I can work with. I did join the United Steelworkers when they came through town talking to us about what was happening in Colombia and Coca-Cola, and they invited us to join as associate members. Well, I was hoping that would mean I could actually start a union here, but they haven't responded to me. I just get their newsletter. So, it's a little disappointing.
Okay.
I really would like to see more strength with the union.
We've got about 3 minutes left. What about the future? Is there any hope, or is this just, you said you were so depressed when you walked out of there, Roberta. Can people go to see this play or read the book or look at the situation of work in America and be hopeful at all? Low-wage work.
I'm hopeful that, given the chance, workers will band together. Barbara says that in her last line, that she says that she believes that there will come a time when workers band together to change this. There will be a lot of tumult and there will be a lot of strikes, but we will be better for it at the end of that. I have to be hopeful for that, and yet I think the stories of these people are so compelling and so desperate. Just think, how can they survive? That it's hard to see the future, I think, right now. I feel that way anyway. I still think we should all see the play.
I do too. It's compelling. It's just compelling, the human story, that how, in spite of all that, people do keep going, people do survive, they find a way to make it. And I think what the play celebrates is not so much the statistics as the experience and the feelings. And that's certainly what we've been concentrating on.
Colin, before we get out, I had one quick question. What do you consider low wage? Minimum wage is what?
Well, minimum wage is $5.15 an hour.
And what would be low wage?
Well, if you use, instead of the poverty level, a reasonable count of what it costs to live, eat, buy health care and child care, in Iowa City, that's about $27,000 a year.
How about nationwide? Do you have any kind of broad?
Nationwide, it would be a little marginally higher, 28, 29,000 for a single wage earner with 2 kids.
Gloria?
I just want to say one more thing. Go see the play. It's really an exciting experience, and I'm sure you'll laugh, you'll cry. It's a wonderful play, and they do offer these reduced tickets if you get there early, right?
That's right. We have 50 seats a night in solidarity with people who might not be able to go to a play otherwise. You can go in for a nickel and a dime. If you have a nickel and a dime, you can come see our play.
That's great, Eric. Colin, last word to you. What do you see short-term or long-term? Possible hope or not?
No, I'm not hopeful. But you don't want to end on that.
Sure, why not? if it is what it is, you know.
What really struck me about the play was how all of these people working so hard to raise their families are poster children for what conservatives talk about. Working hard and that work should be rewarded, and it's not.
About how many million workers do you think are in this situation in the country? Any idea? Either?
I wouldn't hazard a guess.
Okay.
Too many.
Too many. So you're not hopeful, Colin? We're not going to have any great gathering of the workers and.
Well, I'm a tiny bit hopeful about some of the ferment that's going on right now with unions, reaching out across borders, reaching out to these low-wage workers, associate membership. There's some stuff going on that's very interesting.
Okay. Well, this has been really, really fascinating. Obviously, the whole situation of low-wage workers in this country is extremely depressing and distressing. And I would like to leave us with one thought by the noted Italian Politico Gramsci from the 30s. Pessimism of the mind, optimism of the will. Thank you very much for being with us here on Live and Local. Take care.
Optimism of the mind.
Gramsci.
I almost dropped my mic.